in terms of your sort of golden rules that companies should follow for being crisis ready, maybe there's some sort of top tips that you could just share there for people.
Okay, I think one is to make sure that you have sufficient reserves in your operating model. So it's a bit easier for an emergency service because you build in reserves in a way, but it's really easy in a just-in-time culture to not have those reserves in place. So it looks like, to be fair to the supermarkets, they must have had some pretty good reserves because they've seen huge fluctuations in demand. Broadly, they seem to be coping with it. It may be going out of the shops quickly, but going in fairly quickly. So it seems to me that if you can manage to get an operating model that has got some built-in reserves, which is regarded as an investment, not a waste. Now, of course, the more of an emergency service you are, the more you can justify it. I realise that. You could say, look, our margins are really tight. I can't afford to do that. I think when you need it, it's always an investment. I would say that that's really important. Secondly, is to that work around contingency planning. Is that, make it a real thing, don't make it a virtual thing. A lot of people say, well, yeah, we have exercises. Really? Do you really turn the stuff off? And in New Scotland Yard, we had a couple of disasters once where we tested in exercises, turn the generator off. Sorry, turn the electricity off, so that we worked out, did the generators work? Now, this had been done over years, and therefore we knew the generators worked. But then twice within the space of 3 months, our electricity went off and the generators didn't kick in. And we discovered eventually that the first time what had happened was that the fuel in the oil tank of the generator had run out. And we didn't know because the gauge was faulty. So nobody had ever previously turned the thing off, the electric, to see whether the generator worked. And it was a faulty gauge. So these things happen, but best we'd have known before it happened. And the second time was we'd been reassured by the electricity board that we got 3 separate sources of supply to New Scotland Yard, which was true. But they all joined about 100 metres down Victoria Street. And when that got severed, we got a problem. So my point is make it as real as possible when you do your exercising. And there's always a reason people say, well, I can't turn that computer off, I can't do this. Well, we'll just give it a try. Because that's what will happen in an emergency. Those things will let you down. And how do you then fall back? So we regularly tried our computer in the control room. We got about 5 million telephone calls a year. If the command and control computer went down, which occasionally it did, it still had to work. It often meant falling back on paper, but at least we knew how the paper system would work. So those are the things, apart from the final thing I would mention, which I did earlier, which is having a well-trained group of leaders who've got the skills you want in a crisis, and not just the people who can, not just the people who run the business very well, I'm sure, most of the time, and how you train them and keep them switched on, I think is a vital part. And you often get some, sort of indirect benefits from that sort of investment. Their personal development increases, and they become more confident in dealing with not only with crisis, but with the normal ebb and flow of an organisation's dynamics.
And do you think there's things that leaders need to do to effectively transition from being a leader to a crisis leader? Do you think there's a difference in that sort of leadership style and
yes,
skills?
I do think so, yeah. And I don't think everybody does it. And I think that sometimes the people who do that well don't always do the long-term well. So I think you have to recognise that sometimes within yourself, I think, as well as other people might spot it. But I think generally in a crisis, what you do want people who are nimble, quick thinkers. The professor who's going to sort out this COVID crisis, who's going to have to, sort out the testing and everything else that a virologist must have to think about, probably, I guess, will take a long time and good research over many years to have come to some conclusions. But in the midst of a crisis, you need people who are going to, 1, gather information quickly, 2, simulate it, 3, analyse it, come up with some options, and then invest in a solution.
Yeah.
So the first thing is some nimbleness, I think, in ability to think on their feet and to do things quickly. I think, secondly, flexibility, so that, dogmatically and stubbornly sticking to the first plan when it shows that it's not working. We all can, it's always a danger for any one of us. If we adopt the plan, we own it too much. Really hard for one of our colleagues to say, this is actually, I use the word bollocks, this is complete nonsense. We ought to stop. Let's just put our foot on the ball, think again, even if we've made some investment, it's okay to change our mind. It's never a bad thing to change your mind when you're going in the wrong direction. So I think to have a leader who's prepared to be flexible and take feedback is vitally important. And then I think there is something about a rhythm of doing things. That I think you do need people at that stage who are going to put in energy and drive. I think the person in the room who's sapping the energy or wanting to slow things down at a time, you've got to put oomph into it. There are different times for reflection, for mature reflection, and working out the next 3 years. But I think during a crisis, you're going to have somebody who's going to have to inject energy, and it's not about being loud, and it's not about being repetitive. It's not about anything other than a sense of purpose, a sense of drive, and a sense that you're going to see this thing through, because you will come up to points where you don't know what to do.
And just that thing about energy and drive, and when we're looking at the current sort of all the briefings coming out of government and so on, how do people actually keep going through it? I mean, you and I have discussed before about the need for leaders to take a rest, and how to get workforces working for sort of longer periods of time and so on. Maybe you could just share some thoughts around that.
It's certainly difficult to keep going at a high pace for long shifts of work. So, often in a crisis, 12 hours is possibly the usual shift. And in fact, in various crises, I've seen people working 15 hours. And during the riots of 2011, I'd just gone to the Met as an acting deputy. And I stayed together with my colleagues at New Scotland Yard for 3 days and nights. And we didn't really sleep much because, everybody knew what was happening on the streets. With the riots on the Saturday, they got worse on the Sunday, and they got even worse on the Monday. Horrible events. But by the end of 3 nights, we were all just absolutely shattered, and we weren't contributing much. So we then got into a rhythm of making sure that one of us was on, one of us was off. But at the beginning, you do get that sort of long hours culture, which in the most extreme crisis, you probably are going to have to sustain for a while. But I think once the immediacy of the problem has passed, it's absolutely vital that you get rest, and that you make sure that you at least get home. One of the things I've always done, when I go home, if I can't switch off, I certainly switch off my email.
Right.
My point has always been to my staff is, whether it be the weekend or when I'm not here, I work hard when I'm here, and I work long hours, as many people do. But when I'm home, I expect to have some rest, partly because your family need it, partly because you need it. The people you left behind, you should trust enough to get on with the job. But my point has always been to them is, if there's something vitally important you want me to look at, an email, a text, or you want someone to get involved in something, always ring. Never worry about contacting me. But I'm not going to sit there and read my emails minute after hour after hour. Because I speak for myself, I found my stress levels grew because I couldn't deal with it, or I did deal with it, and then you're letting people down. So I think that element of making sure you have some separate time is vitally important, and doing the best with that time you can. And that might be you want to be with your loved ones, it might be some exercise, it might just be with the dog. It doesn't really matter. It's just something that for you produces another input. That's a very scientific way, but just gives you a bit of mind time that allows you and your body to recover.